Come on, genealogy is a good, I rubbed the genealogy out of the bottle. No, that doesn't work. Is that not it? Uh, okay, what's genealogy? Oh yeah, I know that you know. Come on, what's genealogy? Give it a shot, even if you're wrong. It doesn't matter. Yeah, your family line. Yeah. So your genealogy is, your parents and your grandparents and your great grandparents and your great great grandparents. Your family tree, if you think of it that way, it's the genealogy. Where did you come from? Now, what do I mean by the word Messiah? Jesus. Yeah, that's because the answer to every Bible question is Jesus, because it is the right answer, at least 99% of the time. The Messiah is a Hebrew word meaning anointed one, or the one chosen. And in the context of the Bible, Messiah as chosen one in the Hebrew really means the one who would take care of fulfilling the sin and the problems in the world. So if Messiah is a Hebrew word, do you know what the word in Greek is that we use in the New Testament? That means anointed one, Messiah. Christ. Very good. Wow, did you come up with that on your own? No. Yeah. So it's the word Christ. So we use the word Christ. And Christ is a title. It's not Jesus' last name. It's it's a title like doctor or professor or senator or president or whatever. But it's a very, very important title because it means the one that God will send to bring the world back the way it was supposed to be from the beginning of creation. So we're going to talk about the genealogy of the Messiah today. And genealogies can be pretty boring, but they're all throughout the Bible. And so how many of y'all have a Bible? How many of y'all have ever read your Bible? Now here's the hard part. How many of you actually have read it cover to cover? So here is your challenge, right? Your challenge is at some point in your life, the sooner the better, you should try to read the Bible cover to cover because it's actually meant to be read cover to cover because it actually is one complete story in and of itself. Now, it's made up of a bunch of individual stories, but all of those individual stories link to the main story, and if you miss out on the main point of the story, then you miss out on what the Bible is supposed to tell you about. What kind of things can you learn from the Bible? Have you ever learned anything from the Bible? What have you learned from the Bible? I'm putting you on the spot. Like the gospel, right? And gospel is, should I go deeper than that? What's the gospel? About the Messiah, right? The Christ, about Jesus, right? Good, yeah. In fact, the word gospel means good news. That's, what else have you learned from the Bible? What have you learned from the Bible? Say it. No, you're up. How what? Yeah, there's a lot to pick. Just pick one. There's so many things to pick from. About what? Discipline, okay? Yeah, you can learn about discipline from the Bible. What else? What else have you learned from the Bible? What have you ever learned from the Bible? Yeah, that'd be you. Encouragement. That's a perfect thing to learn from the Bible. Well, what have you learned from the Bible? yeah, he's your strength, and yeah, that's good. Those are good things. In fact, there's lots of things we could learn from the Bible. One of the things that we talk about all the time is God's attributes. Who is God? What we use big words like omniscience and omnipotence and omnipresence and stuff like that, or we learn about his love, or we learn about his kindness, or we learn lots of things about God's attributes. We can also learn all this stuff about Israel or justice or the promised land or any kind of stuff like that. We can learn lots of things from the Bible, and I would contend for the most part in almost all the teachings that you get, the one thing, and from your parents too, the one thing that you try to get out of the Bible a lot is morality. What's morality? Yeah, knowing the difference between right and wrong, good and evil, acting correctly or misbehaving, those kind of things. How many of y'all like those lessons? Every parent likes those lessons. But every kid hates those lessons, right? And to some extent, what I think is interesting, and I hope if you only take one thing away from the discussion we have today, is that if you grow up and finally leave your house and become an adult and do your own thing, if the only thing you've ever taken away from your church experience as a kid is that the Bible tells you what's right and wrong, then you got the story wrong. You didn't get the message. You didn't understand the purpose of the Bible or why it exists. Now, does it include morality? Absolutely does. Does it include things about God's attributes? Absolutely it does. Does it talk about the law or sin or the promised land? It even has sections on food. I mean, there's lots of stuff in the Bible. But if your takeaway when you become an adult is that you look back over all your childhood and all the time you spent in youth group and in Sunday school, and your takeaway is that the Bible teaches me how to be a good person, then you've gotten the wrong message from the text. And so that's what I want to talk about today, because the Bible is not, even though it contains all these things, it's not about all these things. It's only about one thing. It's about Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And every story in the Bible walks down a path that leads you towards understanding who the Messiah is, why he had to come, why he will come again, and what your response should be to the Messiah's coming. Now, we have all kinds of great stories in the Bible. What's the story about Samson? Anybody know the story about Samson? What's Samson about? Yeah, being strong, and right? What else is Samson about? Long hair. Yeah, can't have long hair, right? What else is Samson about? Yeah, he married girls that he wasn't supposed to, more than one. What else is Samson about? His strength is through God. Now that's actually a good takeaway. Yeah, that's a good takeaway. The overall story of Samson, even though you may never have been told this, has only one purpose. Samson was used by God to ensure that the Philistines did not destroy the fledgling nation of Israel before it had the chance to bring forth the Messiah. Right? Samson was in the time of the judges, a very terrible time for Israel as a fledgling nation. And the Philistine nation that surrounded part of them, especially to the west of them and the coastline, they were getting stronger and stronger, and they were ready to take over and wipe out the nation of Israel. And God chose Samson to help and destroy the power of the Philistines so that they could not destroy Israel. Because God's intervention was not to give Samson strength. God's intervention was to ensure that Israel would be maintained so that it could bring forth the Messiah. That's the purpose of the story of Samson. And so let's talk real quick in an intro, and we'll do some more of these stories from the Bible so you can see how they link in, because some of the stories in the Bible are really weird. But if you don't put them in the perspective of the Messiah, then you miss the point of the story. So let's talk about the need for the Messiah first. Overall, Genesis chapter 1, what's Genesis chapter 1 about? The creation, right? What's Genesis chapter 2 about? The creation. Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 are the creation, and it's the setting, it's the introduction to the story. And chapter 1 is from God's perspective, chapter 2 is from Adam's perspective, and it's the same story as as the camera pans down into chapter 2 for Adam and the garden. But what happens in the garden is pretty simply this. God, in chapter 1, verse 27, God creates man and woman in his image, right? God creates man and woman to be his representatives on earth. And he delegates to them the ability to rule the earth. So man and woman are created in the image of God, and their job is to rule over all the animals. And to rule over the animals, not in dominion. How do we rule over animals today? We beat the crap out of them. Yeah. We rule them in dominion, with some love in there too, and some treats and some other things. But how do you rule over the cows? You rule over the cows. It's tough. We rule, and how many animals can we rule over? All the animals? No, we can try, but it doesn't work. But in the beginning, we were supposed to. We're supposed to have that dominion over all animals as the image of God. And that was the setup. Well, pretty soon, Satan enters the picture. And we in chapter 3 of Genesis, so this is the third chapter of the book. In chapter 3 of Genesis, Satan comes in. He comes in disguised as a serpent. John, in his book of Revelation, he's the one that tells us later on that the serpent of old is actually Satan and the devil. Well, see, look what Satan does. Satan comes in, and he's disguised as himself as a serpent. He takes the form, he indwells a serpent, or takes the form of a serpent. Now, what's the design? What's man and woman supposed to do? They're supposed to rule over the animals. That's what they were designed to do. What did the serpent do to Adam and Eve? Do you remember the story? Right. The serpent, got Adam and Eve to follow him and push God out of the way. And so now we have Satan ruling over this world, and man and woman, ever since that, we've been making up gods after our own image. That's why there's so many religions and so many thought processes, so many philosophies out there, why it's hard to figure out what is right and what is wrong, what is truth and what is not truth. But in chapter 3, God gives us the first glimpse of the purpose of this story. Remember, we're only in chapter 3 of the very first book. This is the opening. This is the setting of the story. And God says that he'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. What do we mean by the word seed? Somebody said it. Offspring, right? The offspring, child, for the children, right? And so, and he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. Now, this is God's curse to the woman, and he says, hey, and the serpent, he says, I'm going to put strife or enmity or problems between you and between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of Satan, or how Satan rules the world. And I'm going to put problems between you, but there will be a singular, so if you notice there, the word he is singular, that there will be a singular offspring of the woman who will ultimately take care of the problem with Satan and everybody else. So this is the beginning of the story, and it says, hey, this is his purpose. And so the whole then purpose of the Bible is to take that storyline and move it across all of history. If you look at the Bible, you should look at it in this way. And if you take just a couple things away from today's talk, think about this. How many of y'all like movies? How many of y'all seen the new Maverick movie? Oh, right? Or of all the movies, what are your favorite movies? Napoleon Dynamite. Okay, I would figure that. That's good. Actually, I love that movie. It's a great movie with a cult following. What else? What's another good movie? What? Maverick, yeah, yeah, it's a good movie. How many of y'all like Star Wars movies or Marvel movies, right? Or, and now you don't have to put your hands up because how many of y'all like Disney movies? I love Disney movies. How many of y'all like Hallmark love story movies? Oh, I do. I do. One of my favorite parts of the year is Christmas time because my wife and I sit and 3 or 4 nights a week we'll watch a Hallmark Christmas movie. And they're all exactly the same. The characters change and maybe the location changes, but the plot and everything is the same. It's the same with every Star Wars movie. It's the same. It's the same with every Disney story. They're all the same. Every story that tugs at our hearts, that we like because it makes us feel like part of the plan, that we could be the hero, follows exactly the same pattern, and it is the pattern that God designed because he designed us, and it is the same pattern that the Bible uses for its entire storyline. And it goes like this. It starts out with a setting, and the setting is very, very short. It's like the first chapter of the book or the first 5 minutes of a movie. It defines it introduces the hero, the protagonist, right? And it introduces the good life. What's good about what's going on? And what happens really, really quick after that happens? The bad guy shows up. The villain shows up, and you're introduced to the villain, the protagonist. And in the case of the Bible, the hero is God, and the protagonist is Satan. The villain is Satan. And what happens? What does the bad guy do right at the beginning of every movie? He kills somebody, or he takes away from the hero what is good. Maybe he steals the money or takes their land or kidnaps their daughter or whatever it is. Think of all the movies you've watched. They all have this problem that happens right at the beginning that ends up with a conflict, and now the hero has to come up with a plan to do what? To get it back, right? To fix it. And that all happens in the first 5 minutes of a movie, and then the whole rest of the movie, the whole rest of the rising action, as sometimes it's called, or the plot, is how the hero gets back what it is that was messed up from the villain. And sometime around the middle of the movie, something happens that makes you think that, maybe the hero's going to win. At the beginning part, sometimes you don't know. So like in the book of Judges, you don't know whether God's going to win or not. It's not a very good book. And there's really bad stuff going on. But God's always intervening in his story, because his story is the story of history. It's not just a made-up fiction story like we like in watching. We know the end of God's story. We don't always know the end of the movies we watch, and so we hope for something great to happen. And like one of my favorite parts is in Star Wars. You watch the movie and you go, I'm not sure they can win against the galactic forces, until in the middle of the movie they find the blueprints for the Death Star. And once they find the blueprints for the Death Star, your whole mind goes, they have a chance to win now. And then the whole rest of that, the second half of that movie, is them now taking that chance and winning, until what happens near the end of the movie? The final climax, which is usually what? A big fight at the end. And then after the fight, who wins? The good guy wins. If it's a good movie. If it's a bad movie, the bad guy wins. And you don't watch those anymore because they didn't make you feel good, because you wanted the good guy to win. How many of y'all want the good guy to win? Yeah, it depends on whether you want a sequel. If you want a sequel, then it's still the same. You're still So even like in the, you got to love the Marvel movies that the first 3 or 4 of them had the bad guy win until the final end, and then the good guy wins, right? Because inside you want the good guy to win, because inside you want to be the hero of the story. Do you not? Do you not want to be the hero of your own story? We do. We have this desire because we are created in God's image. We have this desire to accomplish, to do what we were originally supposed to do, but the world we live in is pretty difficult. And so the Bible walks through the same thing. The beginning, God defines what the good life is in the garden and how it's supposed to be. Satan comes in as the villain. He brings sin into the world. Mankind is now going to die because of sin. God has to overcome death. And so the plot begins in Genesis chapter 4 as the rising action begins through the Old Testament, now through the New Testament. And in that middle part of the world, we see the glimpse of the reality that God will win is when Jesus came the first time. Jesus came and he conquered death and he conquered sin, but he didn't do it completely in terms of the life we live. He did it for eternity, but not in all that we see. But he also promised that he would then do what? He would come again, a second time. And that second time he comes, what's going to happen? Do you know the story? It's called the Battle of Armageddon, right? The Battle of Armageddon, where Jesus and Satan have the final climactic battle. And guess what happens? Jesus wins. We know Jesus is going to win. We know how the story comes out. But it follows this exact same pattern. And that's why all these movies you watch and all the things that you do, they tug at you because it's the same storyline, because God knows how you think because he created you. And so every story in the Bible follows this whole pattern. And as you walk through the plot of this story, what you find out is the entire storyline of the Old Testament and the New Testament is to track the genealogy of the Messiah. There's nothing in the Bible that doesn't help push along this plot that tracks the genealogy of the Messiah, that tracks the coming of Jesus and the fact that Jesus will come again. Every story has a link that pushes that plot forward. If it didn't, it wouldn't need to be in the story. And so you ask yourself, well, genealogies are boring. How many of y'all like genealogies? How many of y'all have ever read Genesis chapter 5? Oh, Genesis chapter 5 is terrible. It's a snoozer. But it's not terrible. It's wonderful. It's a genealogy. How many of y'all have ever read Chronicles? Oh, the Old Testament book of First Chronicles is like if you ever have a problem going to sleep, pull out your Bible, start reading First Chronicles. It's a book of genealogies, and it just goes on and on and on and on about genealogies. But its point is very purposeful. Its point is that it wants to remind you that the Bible is all about the genealogy of the Messiah. Did I lose my... I did. Oh, were you trying to compensate for me? Thank you. Better? All right. I thought I felt something tickling. I thought it was the Holy Spirit. No. Anyways, but it's not really about, when I say genealogies, it's the actual lineage is not the important part. The important part is the resultant of the lineage. And who is the result of the genealogy? Jesus, right? You got it. That's the right answer to every question. Paul says it this way. He says in 1 Timothy, he said, hey, don't worry too much about endless myths and genealogies, because that's not, that's speculation, but rather the administration of God, which is by faith. Understand what God is doing and the faith that comes through that genealogy, because all those genealogies point to one thing, and that's faith in the Messiah. How many of y'all have a Bible with you? What is the very first chapter of the very first book of the New Testament? Matthew 1. Very good. Okay, so now recite it for me. That's awesome. You're really good at reading. And so you got to think about it this way. Why do you think that the very first chapter of the very first book of the New Testament is the genealogy of Jesus? It's important, yeah. Now, but why is it the very first? Why is that the opening chapter of the New Testament? Proof for Israel. That's good. Why else? Yeah, yeah, it's part of the story, right? It's the linkage between the Old Testament and the New. The New Testament starts out saying, hey, we're going to tell you about the Messiah who's actually going to show up. And the whole Old Testament is about having faith in the Messiah that is to come. Up until this point, the whole Old Testament is about the genealogy of Jesus. Now the New Testament shows up and Jesus appears. The Messiah appears for the first time. This is the transition between the Old Testament and the New. It's the point that tells you that the whole book has to go together. The book doesn't make sense if you separate the Old Testament from the New Testament. It is one complete story, and this is that transition as it walks through. And it's interesting, within that genealogy, we're not going to read it because it'll put you to sleep too, but there's some things you should see that are very, very important in it. One, there's actually 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus. I'm going to talk about 2 of them if we have time. We may not have time to do all these, but we're going to talk about Tamar and about Ruth. We also, but the others are Rahab and Bathsheba and Mary. And so what's interesting about the genealogy of Jesus is it's not all about Israel. Some of these people in the genealogy are not even Israelites. And some are more important to be women than they are to be men. And the genealogy of Jesus takes all people and brings them together in who he is and why he had to come. No other religion does that. No other philosophy, especially at the time when the New Testament was written and pulled together, would have done anything like that. That would have been very strange. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about why these genealogies matter and why these two. Why is Tamar in the genealogy of Jesus? Why is Ruth in the genealogy of Jesus? And so we'll talk about those 2 examples, and maybe if we have time, we'll talk about some others. But the whole book of Genesis covers about 2,400 years of genealogy, and it's actually broken down into a bunch of sections that use this term, the genealogy of. Right? There's a whole series of statements throughout the book of Genesis that break it into different sections and different parts of the story that push forward the agenda of the genealogy of the Messiah. And it starts with Adam, goes through Noah, goes down and when it comes to Noah, what's interesting is it says that in Genesis chapter 3 that the ground is cursed. So when God curses at the fall, he curses the ground. And then when Noah is born, his father says, wow, Noah's the one that's going to take the curse away. And to some extent, he did for that generation. He was the savior for that generation, and the new world began after the flood. And so we get down after that to Abraham, and Abraham was the son of Terah. And so the whole second half of Genesis is about the lineage of Abraham, which is the first of the patriarchs, which then brings us to the establishment of Israel, and from that to the establishment of Judah. But for Abraham was given, so the storyline continues, right? So the first promise was given to Eve that one of her offspring would be the one to change the world. That promise now is given to Abraham in chapter 12, and it says, here, you're a good reader, read that. Loud, nice and loud.
Go forth from your country to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, so you shall be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed.
And interestingly enough, it says, and in you, that's the word seed again, and in you all the nations of the world will be blessed. From you, from your genealogy, from your offspring will come the Messiah. So now the story starts to unfold now as we get more specifics into how that Messiah is going to come. Came from Adam, through Noah, now through Abraham. And as Genesis ends, it ends with Judah getting part of that. Judah, anybody know who Judah is? He's not the oldest son, but he is the son that had the right to have the offspring. The oldest son of Israel kind of messed things up, you know. But Judah is the one to bring forth, and and it says in Genesis 49 that Judah, this is Israel now, or Jacob, giving the final blessings to the 12 sons of Israel. And he says, to Judah, you're going to be the lion's whelp. And the last, in the middle, it says, nor the ruler's staff from between the feet. And to him shall be the obedience of all the peoples. So as you read through that, what you find is that through Judah, what's another name for Jesus? He's called the something of Judah. The Lion of Judah, right? That comes from this verse that it says, you're going to be like a lion. You're going to be the leader. Out from you, Judah, will come the leader, the Messiah. And so, we kind of end Genesis right there. But interestingly enough, there's this terrible, terrible chapter in there, in chapter 38. And I want to read it to you because it's really ugly. And if I was going to be the guy writing the Bible, I would have left this chapter out because it's not very nice. It doesn't seem on the surface to be a story worthy to be put into the Bible as a story itself. And it says, it came to pass about that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. She bore still another son and named him Shelah. And it was at Cherzeph that she bore them. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, his brother, go into your brother's wife and perform your duties as a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so when he went in to his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to her brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, I'm afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. And now after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to the sheep herders and said to his friend Hira, and they told Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to shear the sheep. So she removed her widow's garment and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in the gateway, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here now, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? And he said, therefore, I'll send you a young goat from the flock. Will you give me a pledge until you send it? And he said, what shall I give you? And he said, your seal and your cord and your staff. So he gave them to her and went in, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and departed and removed her veil and put on her widow's garments. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, they didn't find her. And he said, well, we didn't find her. In verse 24, it says, now it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by harlotry. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man to whom these things belong. And she said, please examine and see whose signet ring and cord and staff are these. And Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I. Now that's a very weird story. So to summarize the story, the firstborn of Judah, who you would think should be in the line of the Messiah, which would be normal, the firstborn of Judah marries this girl named Tamar. Well, turns out to be not a very good guy. God kills him, takes him out, right? Now, so in that culture, what was supposed to happen is that if a brother was not able to have children, because remember, genealogies are important, and how you pass things down through your genealogy is important. If you weren't able to have children and your husband died, then your brother would go do the duty and be able to have kids so that offspring would, and your genealogy would go forth. But so God kills So Onan, his brother, was supposed to go in and get her pregnant. And he said, I ain't doing this. And he messed it up, and God killed him too. Now, is this a good story so far? But in the end, it'll be a good story. But no, this is a terrible, terrible. Who would teach a story like this? This is absolutely terrible. I guess I would teach a story like this because I'm doing that right now. But this is a terrible, terrible story. And so he gets killed, and then the daughter-in-law, Tamar, says, well, I'm supposed to, be able to have a son, and my father-in-law is not going to give me the third son, so I'm going to go be a prostitute and get him to go to bed with me so that I can have a baby from my father-in-law. Gross me out. Right? What kind of story is this? This is a terrible story. Like I said, I would not put this story in the Bible if I was the author of the Bible. But I am not the author of the Bible, and the story goes on. So Judah finds out that she's pregnant and in harlotry, because she acted like a prostitute. And he says, let's burn her. We'll take care of this. We'll burn her. But guess who the father was? The father was Judah. And at the end, and this is the part that gets me in this story. This is why you have to understand why stories are in the Bible. At the very end, after all this, Judah says that she is more righteous than me. Is anything in this story righteous? No. There is no redeeming morality or goodness in this story at all. It is ugly. It is a story of selfishness and shame and debauchery and misleading and lack of loyalty. There is nothing in this story that is good. And at the end, Judah says, Tamar, you are more righteous than I. Why do you think this story is in the Bible? The answer is really, really quite simple. This story is in the Bible because Tamar was in the line of the Messiah. And God needed to make sure that the genealogy of the Messiah went forth independent of the actions of the people that were involved in it. Tamar put her faith in the line of the Messiah because she was due that from the firstborn of Judah, who was given the promise to bring forth the seed. That's why Tamar was more righteous than Judah, because Judah had the responsibility to bring forth the Messiah, the seed, and he wouldn't do it. Tamar forced it to happen. Tamar becomes more righteous, not because of her actions, they were terrible, but because she seemed to, maybe, understand that the genealogy of the Messiah is the most important. Now, whether she truly understood that or not, you can't get that from the text, but you got to understand that the purpose of this story is not to tell you that any of this behavior is okay or not okay. It's to tell you that your behavior is independent of what the Messiah will come and do and what the Messiah has done for you. So when I told you earlier that that the Bible is not necessarily about morality, it's not. Now it has morality in it because you all can read the story and you go, that was bad and that was not the way we should do it. But the point of the story is simply this. The morality of Tamar and the morality of Judah didn't make a difference. What made a difference was the genealogy of the Messiah and God's desire to bring forth the Messiah who is called Jesus. Placing your faith in Jesus is the only significant thing that matters. Now, after you do that, then we can talk about morality, we can talk about acting, we can talk about being, we can talk about all kinds of things of how to sanctify, how to be more like Jesus. But the only decision that matters is, do you place your faith in the coming Messiah? And it's independent of how messed up you are or how hosed up your thinking is. Judah and Tamar were terrible, terrible people in this story. But they had the purpose of God to bring forth the genealogy of the Messiah, and God made it happen. Now let's take another story. Let's take an interesting that Tamar gives birth to Perez. Perez is the one in the genealogy of the Messiah from Matthew chapter 1, right? And Perez was born from Tamar through Judah. And this is where Genesis ends. It ends with Perez. So now we got to figure out, well, where's the rest of the genealogy comes from? So let's take another story. How many of y'all know the story of, during the time of the Judges, know the story of Ruth? Do y'all know the story of Ruth? Okay. Is Ruth a good story or a bad story? Well, compare it to the Judah Tamar one. Ruth is a wonderful story, right? Ruth is a story about loyalty and love and commitment and follow through and following the rules and being a good girl and doing all things for your parents. Ruth is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story. And it's a wonderful story about that. But that's not why that story is in the Bible. That story is not in the Bible so that you can be a better person. That story is not in the Bible so that you can reflect and be, I want to be like Ruth and be loyal to my parents and stuff like that, because that will help me and get me something in life. The whole purpose of, and we're going to skip a couple things here. The whole purpose of Ruth is this, and it comes in the last chapter of Ruth. Let me find it in my Bible, see if I can find it real quick. Okay, so if you know the story of Ruth, if you're familiar with, how many of y'all have never read the story of Ruth or heard of it? Okay, so in general, Ruth is a Moabitess. She's not even an Israelite, right? She's not even Jewish. She's from the country of Moab. She marries a guy named Mahlon, who happens to be in the line of the Messiah, right, coming from Perez. And Mahlon dies. And so in a similar way, this story has a lot of the same attributes as the story of Judah and Tamar. Mahlon is supposed to be in the line of the Messiah. Mahlon dies in a drought before Mahlon and Ruth can have a child. And so Naomi, the mother, says, well, you girls go back to your own home, and I'll go back to Israel, and we'll figure it all out. But Ruth says, no, I'm dedicated to you. I'm loyal to you. I want to be with you. Where you die, I will die. And Ruth follows Naomi back to Israel because the pestilence or the drought has ended, and there's now food back in Israel. So they go back, and she gets the Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, which would have been the equivalent to the brother of Mahlon, because there were no brothers left, to marry them and have the offspring. It is this very, very same story, but in this case, it's the story of really good behavior on the part of everybody. Everybody in the story has really decent behavior. But the purpose of the story is this. It's at the end of chapter 4, it says, and so she had a child. She says, then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, so they named him Obed, and he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Where was Perez? Perez was the guy who ended Genesis. And so Ruth now, at the very, summarizes the book of Ruth. It says, these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, to Hezron was born Ram, to Ram Amminadab, and to Amminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. The book of Ruth is in the Bible in order to link the end of Genesis to the book of Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, to mind the gap of the time of the judges, to show the genealogy that goes from Perez to King David, that ultimately goes then from David to Jesus. The only reason it's in there. And it's the exact same storyline as Judah and Tamar. But one of them, they were all terrible people, and in Ruth, they were all wonderful people. And the point is simply this. It does not matter your morality. It only matters whether you put your faith in the Messiah. So if you walk away from high school and go to college, and you look back on all your Sunday school and all the things you learned as a kid, and you think that the only thing the Bible taught you was how to be good or bad, you got the story wrong. The story is whether or not you're going to put your faith in Jesus, the Messiah. Now, after that, there's a lot of place for good and bad and behavior and that. But none of that matters until you place your faith in the Messiah. That's what the Bible is about. It is the story of redemption of mankind, independent of how they act, because we all act in evil ways. How many of y'all are good all the time? I know you are. Dad is, yeah. Jamie is, you know. We know we're not good all the time. I had a pastor, he said to me once, it was great, we got to close, but he said, if people knew exactly what I thought of them, nobody would like me. Is that not true? That's true. But the Bible tells us quite simply that there is a difference between good and bad. There is a difference between right actions and wrong actions. But in the end, those don't matter as much as whether or not you place your faith in the Messiah. The whole Bible is about the genealogy of the Messiah and how the Messiah got here and how he will come again. And everything God does in intervention in this world is to bring forth his Son again. Not to give you a new car, not to show you what college you should go to, right? Not to figure out who your spouse should be. Not that we can't pray and ask and spend time in that relation, but that's not his primary purpose. His primary purpose is to intervene in this world in order to ensure that his Son comes back and redeems the world as it has been set up. All right, we are out of time, so let me pray. Heavenly Father, I'm thankful for these folks that are here. Bless them, help them to understand the Bible and the fullness of the stories that are in it, that they have real meaning besides what we take out of them superficially. In Jesus' name, amen.